Good evening, everyone. I want to thank the Washington Hebrew Congregation, Shiloh Baptist Church, Metropolitan AME Church, and Metropolitan Wesley AME Zion Church for inviting me to join you. And thank you to all the congregations that are taking part in this service with your attendance. I also want to thank Rabbi Shankman for her leadership and my good friend Susan Esserman, who invited me to speak this evening. We've done great work together over the years on domestic violence and human trafficking, and I look forward to the great work ahead. The Martin Luther King Jr. holiday weekend is a wonderful time for selfless reflection and a time to embrace the surrounding community. And in Prince George's County, I've been inspired by the resilience of our residents through this pandemic and the understanding that we will only get through this by sticking together. It is a fitting mindset to carry into this MLK Jr. holiday weekend. One of the most inspirational passages from Dr. King comes from his book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? He wrote this book in 1967, and it would be his final one. At the time, it was a critical moment in American history, and Dr. King had time to reflect on the impact of the March on Washington, Bloody Sunday, and other demonstrations. After years of protest and pressure, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. These were groundbreaking achievements that would change the course of history. But there was so much more ground left to break, and Dr. King saw potential to create an even more just society. This future was in mind when he wrote, "In this world, a man must either be an anvil or the hammer. We must be hammers shaping a new society rather than anvils molded by the old. This not only will make us new men, but will give us a new kind of power. It will not be an image of power that tends to corrupt, the absolute power that corrupts absolutely. It will be power infused with love and justice that will change dark yesterdays into bright tomorrows." It is important to note that Dr. King saw those involved in the push for civil rights to be hammers shaping the course of history. Far too often, the retelling of history reduces King's legacy to someone whose faith in nonviolence was passive in the face of evil, and not someone with a firm hand on bending the moral arc of the universe towards justice. During that time, society was in serious need of shaping. For example, even with the massive legislative victories that were won, poverty was widespread. We know that opponents of the Voting Rights Act did not take the laws passing lying down, and there were still attempts to limit the right to vote. Police brutality did not cease after Bloody Sunday, and prejudice could still compel citizens driven by hate to carry out violence on black citizens. Citizens like 9-year-old Donna Reason, daughter of a white mother and black father, who was killed when a hate-filled person threw a makeshift bomb through the window of her family's house in Pennsylvania. Citizens like Sam Hammond, Delano Middleton, and Henry Smith, who were killed by police during protests to desegregate a bowling alley in South Carolina. The officers were later acquitted. Sadly, as hopeful as Dr. King was in a brighter future, we recognize that today we still face many of the same challenges 57 years later. As the effects of the pandemic forced many out of work, it placed a spotlight on the fact that poverty and hunger are still major problems in this country. Just in Prince George's County, my administration's Stand Up and Deliver program has provided over 400,000 boxes of groceries, or 3.9 million meals, to our residents in need. And even more, the pandemic has laid bare the many inequities that continue to exist throughout society. Still today, forces of opposition continue working to obstruct the right to vote. In fact, the very halls where lawmakers are presently debating on how to restore voting rights were overrun by those who would threaten our very democracy to get their way. Still today, names like Donna Reason can be replaced by Ahmaud Arbery, a life taken by citizens blinded by hate. Sam Hammond's place in the headlines can be taken by Elijah McCain, whose youthful potential was erased before it could begin. I know many of you can vividly recall the summer of 2020 when citizens of all races and backgrounds nationwide poured into the streets and marched in the largest combined civil rights demonstrations in history to protest police violence against black people. I went out and joined Prince Georgians in the protest against systemic racism. And as we marched in protest over what was done to George Floyd, we easily could have replaced his name with the name of J.C. James. J.C. James was my great-grandfather, unarmed and guilty of no crime. He was murdered by a sheriff's deputy in Seneca, South Carolina in 1956. That's how my family ended up in Prince George's County, as they told my great-grandmother they'd kill the whole family if they did not leave town. I'm sure you can already guess, but that sheriff's deputy was never convicted of a crime after he murdered my great-grandfather. And still today, there are people who seek to hide our nation's history so that our children can't see the parallels and make the realization that while we are making progress to shape a better society, we still face some of the same evils today. Dr. King's call to shape our nation remains as relevant as ever. To be hammers shaping a new society is an active process. It is a call for us to get into the fight and be an active participant in this world. Nothing is accomplished by waiting for someone else to do it. Nothing gets done if we sit and hope it happens on its own. And nothing happens if we quietly watch society continue on a destructive shape. This theme was echoed by the last person to speak before Dr. King at the March on Washington in 1963, who said America must not become a nation of onlookers. America must not remain silent, not merely Black America, but all of America. It must speak up and act. These were the words of Rabbi Joachim Prince. They captured a lot of Prince's life's experience. He was a rabbi in Germany in the 1930s and was often harassed and detained by the Gestapo, and was finally told by Nazi authorities to take his family and leave Germany permanently. He settled in New Jersey, and after moving to America, he saw the racism that Black people faced, and it reminded him of what his people went through in Germany. Many of the messages Rabbi Prince spoke had a lot in common with Dr. King's own, who believed that to ignore evil is to become an accomplice to it. In one of Rabbi Prince's sermons to his congregation, he preached, "What we need is the realization that we are all in the same boat, and that the forces of religion, morality, and decency are faced with the very same dangers and confronted with the very same problems. If one of them loses, all of them do." Rabbi Prince became president of the American Jewish Congress and helped make Congress one of the nation's leading civil rights organizations. He finally met Dr. King in 1958 and found a kindred spirit in the man who said that the ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence by good people. Rabbi Prince built an alliance with African American leaders and organizations and resolved to use the platforms of the American Jewish Congress to push civil rights forward any way that he could. He used his influence to shape a better society. The lesson is clear. We cannot be bystanders to wrongdoing, even if it only targets others. Just as Rabbi Prince was moved to act by racism against Black people should take offense when they witness anti-Semitism. We should all be enraged when people face discrimination because of what they look like or who they love. We should protest when we see attacks on the rights of women or those who are living with disabilities. We should take it as an affront that hunger and poverty exist for so many in the wealthiest nation in the world. We should not accept that violence continues to threaten certain communities while watching from the safety of our own neighborhoods. We must stand up to evil wherever it arises, because your liberation is tied to the liberation of others. Your freedom is the foundation to build freedom for others. As Dr. King famously said, we cannot walk alone. That togetherness continues to get us through the toughest times. One thing that I've witnessed firsthand as we continue to battle the pandemic is the way the faith community has stepped in to serve others in need. And it is not done just because it is the right thing to do, because we know the right action can be taken for the wrong motivation. It is not done to present an image to observers, and it isn't just done because our futures are intertwined. Compassion for your fellow man is what drives this service. The most important part of Dr. King's message I quoted in the beginning talked about not only achieving the power to shape society, but power infused with love and justice that will change dark yesterdays into bright tomorrows. It's what compels us to act swiftly during times of emergency, and it's what pushes us to create a better future. It's what summons the faith community to reach out to others in the midst of a pandemic that has us all at risk. It's what calls people of all races, genders, and religions to march and demonstrate in the streets for justice. It's true love for your neighbor. Scripture says in 1 Corinthians 13, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast but do not have love, I gain nothing. The word love here is defined in Hebrew as to give. In Greek, it's defined as unconditional, willing to suffer. It goes beyond simply saying or doing the right thing as an empty gesture. This suggests being willing to lose something for a greater cause. This kind of love is a powerful motivation. It's the kind of love that compelled Rabbi Prince to trade his confrontations with the Gestapo for clashes with police while protesting Woolworth's discriminatory policies against Black people. It's the kind of love that compels protesters to march in the streets and risk their freedom, whether for voting rights, to stop violence in the community, calling for police accountability, or fighting some other societal inequity. It's the kind of love that called John Lewis to nearly give his life on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It's the kind of love that led young Rita and her newlywed husband Michael to get involved in the civil rights movement. The young couple took part in a few demonstrations. Rita and John Lewis then persuaded Michael to go to Mississippi and help register Black citizens to vote. It was on this trip to Mississippi when Michael Schwerner, James Chaney, and Andrew Goodman, investigating the burning of a Black church, were murdered by those resisting the shaping of a brighter tomorrow. They and many others in the movement gave the ultimate sacrifice. It is a blessing to think about how Rita Schwerner and John Lewis were able to see the fruits of their hard work. But in many instances, those who work to change dark yesterdays don't get the chance to see the bright tomorrows they helped bring. That love for others that you may never encounter is so powerful. There's an ancient proverb that says, a society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shade they know they shall never sit. What we do today to create brighter tomorrows is our expression of love to future generations. The work that the faith community does in our neighborhoods serves the residents presently there, but also shapes a relationship of love and trust for the future. Whether working to provide the COVID-19 vaccine to our residents or trying to eliminate violence in our communities, the work I do on behalf of my constituents benefits them today, but I also know that working to create lasting equity across the spectrum for Prince Georgians in areas like education, economics, and healthcare will go a long way toward creating a brighter future. Just as the sacrifices of Dr. King and so many others have improved our quality of life, the collaborative work we do to protect the rights of others is our gift of love to those who come after us. Today, as we honor the life and legacy of Dr. King, know that I am inspired by the love I see motivating all of you to shape a better society. We have so much to do, but I wholeheartedly believe that a brighter future awaits. Thank you all, and may God continue to bless you. Thank you.